we have time for a few questions. So please address your question to a particular panelist, and let us see for maybe half an hour or so we can have some questions and answers. Any questions, please? Yes. Identify yourself, please, and address the particular panelist.
Dr. Shivaji Sai Baba, recently I formed an NGO, Sustainable Alternatives.
Could you please stand up so that everybody can listen to your question?
I'm Dr. Shivaji Sai Baba. I was an ex-student of here, and recently I founded an NGO, Sustainable Alternatives, to highlight the academics of the diaspora. All the three papers are very interesting. The first paper is excellent, the second paper is the best, third paper is more than excellent. My question to the third paper, because of staying in outside India, you got very good masala and the quality is there, maturity is there. You told that India is the emerging giant, but India is emerging giant in corruption, but not in bringing the growth. If you depend, do you see the diaspora also providing more than the foreign banks as a plus point to India or not?
So if I get your question correctly, you're saying is the Indian diaspora contributing to foreign banks?
More than foreign banks as a plus point to the Indian growth.
I think I will look at portfolio flows, which I did not talk about much. And if you look at certain projects and portfolio, there is a lot of examples. There is not so much as a figure or a number. We are looking at some case and points or personal examples. Again, for example, there is a lot of investments in healthcare or education initiated by diaspora members with some philanthropy involved. So maybe in that direction. Again, they have to conduct business through NRI accounts and FCNR accounts. So money is channelized through proper Indian channels. But if you look at the economic argument for that, again, whether you send money through remittances or these accounts, it does enable India's exchange rate to be stronger. So, just as an individual example, it's a multiplier effect. I bring dollars with me, I change it to Indian currency, and I spend it in the local Indian economy. So there is money flowing either through banks or investments or individually. So that's what's coming, if I understand your question.
Any other questions, comments? Yes, please. Okay.
Just trying to draw back again to the same question. I was preparing a question like that. If India is really contributing to the World Bank, if investment is not restricted, how come when you come in here, you change your dollar, and when you get, to be specific, your stipend, you find it difficult to even send one rupee home? I don't know if you understand what I mean. There's a restriction. I was personally told the Western Union, I tried to get the Western Union, I was personally told that I can only receive money, but I can't send back home. And I begin to wonder how. So is that restriction is, I need you to throw more light in that respect.
I didn't know about Western Union. I know that I've never tried to remit from here back, so I don't know about that procedure. But I don't know too much about this topic, so I can't shed much light on this. Maybe Dr. Maybe you can share.
If I'm not wrong, Western Union is a private body. It doesn't reflect to the Indian government. And it is a private authority in dealing with the money transfer and all those things. That is why they have some favorable position for itself. That is why they are not allowing you to sends money in rupees.
So I think Western Union has to do with the post office. The post office is government owned. So I don't see any difference between the Western Union and the post office. So I think this should be part of the accommodation she has to make. So if trade
Yes,
is
I
really
will look into this more.
Yes, please.
Yes. Good afternoon, sir. Yeah. My question, I'm not directing my question to her, but on the issue of Western Union. Western Union operates within the laws of this country. It cannot go out of the laws of this country.
Exactly.
Now, I'm just trying to make an observation over on the first presentation, on the first presenter. Now, she talked about America. You talked about Indians that are living in America, in diaspora, and doing fine. Now, I feel that all of us here, there's no American. If there's an American here, it is 0.5%. But why did you mention about Indians that are suffering in Africa? We have a number of Indians who are suffering, but you never mentioned about that. Then on the issue of the case, I remember somebody mentioning the issue of the case, saying that it unites you, bringing you together. I'm telling you, that is a barbaric way of living, because you have got 4 cases, rather 5 or so. You find that these people, these that are outside the case, you find that these people, they are the ones that have even migrated out of the country because they are marginalized. They are not even allowed to participate in most of the things here in India. So I feel that the caste is doing harm to you a lot. And then you just talked about the Hindus doing fine in America and all that. What about the Muslims? We have Muslims in Zambia, where I come from. We have a lot of Muslims, but most of them are suffering. You never mentioned about what they are doing and what they are contributing to India, to this country. So once you talk about India, let's be objective. You talk about the West things and the greatest things. No, that's the way you look at things, not just looking at the good things, good things. You're talking about America. When America here, I don't think there's anybody from America here. So talk about
Thank you for your nice comments. But it so happened that all these papers, 3 papers, somehow, I mean today, maybe in next seminar there may be, some papers addressing this question about Africa or some other parts of the world or maybe Gulf. So it's just incidental that some of these papers are related to America and Indo-American relations or that kind of thing. Just incidental. Nothing. I mean, there's no discrimination. All kinds of people have been migrating, and Muslims are there, Sikh are there, Hindus are there, everybody is there. So it's just incidental. Moreover, it's a question of analysis, So depending on the expertise of individual panelists, they are addressing, their paper accordingly, and we can't expect that they will discuss everything, right now. So for that we require another seminar or broader seminar, things like that. So it happens. Anyway, yes, please, somebody here from this side first. Okay, yeah, please go ahead.
Going back to the closed economy that you said has open since 1990, so that of the remittances of the Western Union or whatever. The Western Union, whatever corporation is operating within a soil is governed, is operated within the confines and the law of a particular country. And the Western Union, you're talking about inflow and outflow of cash through the postal system. Whatever you have to say, it is financial movement of money. So therefore, it has to do with the Central Bank of India. So whatever you have to say, it is a tactful way. I am objectively, in theory, your system has opened, but in principle, I don't think this is a free market economy. It is a closed economy in which you are tactfully encouraging inflow or what's in and discouraging people to enjoy from your economy.
Yeah, I think that works. Actually, I'm not knowledgeable about, I know Western Union, and the money comes in, but if you want to send it, you can't do that. So obviously there are certain restrictions, and you are right.
So with that,
yes, please, go ahead.
It's not an open economy.
Well, one can say. One can say. I mean, there is no. It's a question of perception and all. Yes, please. Okay.
Why did the Indian government not allow dual citizenship?
Did not allow dual citizenship.
Yeah.
Uh,
And how do you conduct your marriages?
Pardon?
How do you conduct your marriages in US?
Oh, marriages in US.
Yeah, whether
What do you mean?
traditional way or
First question.
the US way.
Okay.
I think I mentioned a little bit about dual citizenship that the Indian government does not allow at this point because it opens up a lot of other political questions about political rights such as voting and which diaspora is allowed to vote in India, and caste-based because there's a lot of migration that's caste-related and they vote for their particular candidates. So it opens up, and also security issues. If you allow dual citizenship, it allows entry and exit into India, which if you look at the security climate in India is very important to preserve. And the countries that don't allow dual citizenship, including India, have the same argument, really. The cons of dual citizenship is across the board. The second question about marriages in the United States for Indians is the same as, I would think, any other US citizen to register and vote and get married.
Maybe she can address. Thank you very much for that question. Just allow me to read just one advertisement that appeared in the Hindu daily. Okay, and that can answer your question. This is matrimonial advertisement. Alliance invited for unmarried Brahmin boy. Looking for unmarried Brahmin, Iyengar, others. These are the sub-castes within Brahmins. Bride. Looking for unmarried Brahmin, within bracket, Iyer or Iyengar or others, bracket closed, bride, for a well-settled unmarried groom, PhD, aged 30 years, owner of multinational company and financially well-to-do family settled in Los Angeles, California, USA. Boy, born in India and brought up in Indian traditions. Fair, again a racial this thing, and has clean habits, non-smoker, non-drinker, pure vegetarian. Boy is handsome. Now who decides this? Boy himself has to decide. Hails from respectable and affluent business family. Expectation from girls. Now what he is expecting? Can speak Tamil. That is his mother tongue, that language, which is the mother tongue of the southern part of this country. Fair. Girl must be fair. Good looking. Height should be between 4 feet and 12 inches to 5 feet and 3 inches. Non-drinker, non-smoker, vegetarian, homely girl. She shouldn't go out for work. She shouldn't work. Cultured. This is the culture. Family background, cultured family background. Age group. He is, now that guy is 30 years of age. Age group between 22 to 27. Not to work after marriage. Girl should be willing to relocate to USA. No financial expectations from the boy side. Now, where are these details invited? Email it. What are the things to be emailed? Number 1, birth details. Birth date, time, city. Number 2, photos. Number 3, contact details, mobile number or landline. And detailed profile with family background to mysonsmarriage@gmail.com. So this is the advertisement, and these kind of marriages happen in India. And this is not the only advertisement. I can show you lots of advertisements which are very much in my purse. but it will take a lot of time. But this was just an example. And therefore, I would like to differ with the third presenter that the marriages take place by just going to the office and signing.
No,
I
misunderstood her question.
This is what. Thank you. Hopefully this answers your question.
Yeah, so, in short,
I just want to clarify, I misunderstood your question. I thought you were asking have marriages take place. Yeah. You do go to court because you need the document itself, so that's what. But just to say, my husband is Iyengar Tamil and I am not. And these are also happening. And this is a trend, upward trend. You see mixing of castes and classes. Actually, a couple of years younger to me in age. And so, you know, things are changing a lot and happening both in India and abroad with the mixing. So that's the difference.
okay, next question, please. Any question? Yes. A little louder, please.
I actually want to follow the to appreciate the presenter. They have actually done wonderfully well. Preemptively, I want to actually appreciate their performance. My comment is first of all goes to the co-presenter. During her presentation, she actually showed to compare India to China. And I am to see the rate of growth that exists between the two. I think the population differential actually explains some of the growth in India. Because when you talk about the contribution made by Chinese and then compared to India, because of their population, they will have that competitive advantage, which shows that differential in that growth. Then the question which I want to ask is, you talk so much with your hypotheses, with your hypothesize and come with, although actually we don't know what you do to test the significance, that maybe we come out with that win-win situation actually, but you came out with the benefit of dual citizenship, so which my first predecessor, she has made some comment on. But my concern is, since you know the benefit of that dual citizen which we have highlighted, what are the efforts that you as an academic giant and then researchers are making to convince the government? Because no matter what, when you talk about the overseas citizen certificate alone, it may not be an encouraging tool to actually facilitate and fast-track people, Indians, to actually come to invest there if the provision for dual citizenship has not been provided. So what are the efforts actually that you are making to convince the government that this is the benefit that this country will benefit, that will make the Indian diaspora become to go more progress on this global understanding?
I think like any other grievances and demands, it takes time for anything to come to completion. What we can see is that this is under discussion at this point because clearly India has equal, if not more, emphasis placed on security and political climate of the country more than the economic investment, which they are getting anyways from all kinds of investors in the country. So I think it's a work in progress. It is addressed in every conference, such as the one last year in August. This topic was discussed. And as I mentioned, the next step was already the Indian, the IOP card, which takes a step further, which allows OCI for multiple entry into India. So they are working on different things. Multiple entry at this time is better than taking a visa every time you want to come to India. And this also applies to the second and third generation Indians abroad. So I think this is a step in the right direction because they cannot ignore the security implications of a dual citizenship at this point. That's one step ahead. So it's under discussion.
Friends, we can take one or two more questions. Yes, please.
Practically, I have two questions. First, I just want Dr. Anand Singh, we addressed you. We'll start with you. First of all, I would like to actually start with the arguments that are normally made with regards to the Indian nation. That is that India is a multiple nation. And therefore, when we talk of Indian diaspora, I think you have indicated a lot of data which relates to certain regions and certain states. But when it comes to identifying an Indian diaspora, we come to the conglomerate idea of an Indian diaspora, which practically actually there is a lot of gap in understanding who is an Indian diaspora, because there is a lot of regional assertion and identification. So that is one, and therefore I personally feel I feel that when you talk of investment, especially in the first type of investment that you were talking about, we have to put a little more of this regional input into it. That is one. Therefore, my second question to Dr. Amit is, I was hoping that in your presentation with the regarding Indian diaspora and Look East policy, you would also address the issue of Northeast Indian diaspora, which is actually going to play a very important role in the whole policy of in this whole Indian Look East policy, which actually I think it is absent in your paper. So therefore, I think it's time that we also look into when we address or when we address issues of diaspora relating to Kerala diaspora, Andhra diaspora, or Telugu diaspora. There is also a time, I think even the government of India has started initiating a process in which to negotiate with the Northeast Indian diaspora, because there's a lot of political impact on it.
Okay, thanks.
First of all, my view is that I do not believe that we have different nationalities. I believe we have different identities instead of. And in my presentation, I have addressed Indian diaspora as a whole. I did not mention the Bhojpuri diaspora or Telugu or Tamil or something like that. But when we are speaking about the India's Look East policy, and yes, you are correct, the success of the India's Look East policy depends on Northeast. That is why most of the time the Indian policy makers emphasize that India's Look East policy depends on the development of the Northeast, especially our relation with the Burmese authorities, because most of the insurgent group of the Northeast finds safe haven across the border, especially in Myanmar. That is why we have initiated our Look East policy for furthering the developmental purposes in India's northeastern state and with Myanmar or some other parts of the Southeast Asian countries. So it is essential and it is India's internal security interest to maintain good relation not only with the Burma but as well as the entire Southeast Asian countries, for furthering the connection, the route or for development as well as in the Northeast or the other countries.
The last question, please. Somewhere. Yes.
Thanks, Dr. Mandanisha, for your presentation. I have noticed that India, or you have already told, the overseas Indians are donors, right? And the complexity of dual citizenship. So, my first observation question is that the overseas Indian card holders have the voting right or not. If they have the voting right, they are voting in the national general election through online or email or like that. If they have the mechanism to have or not. And another question is that India is patronizing tourism. At the same time, India is also fearful to the dual citizenship. If an Indian becomes an Australian citizen, then you see that you have the security problem. I think this is some sort of problem. When your nationality, living there 30 years or 50 years, because most of the people went abroad in the 1940s and in the Cold War period. Right? So after 6 years, 7 years, when they come being a citizen, how do you fear that it will be a security problem in the country? So how you entertain tourism in your country? I think it is not very good.
Okay,
think again it's a very complex problem, because trying to ascertain the authenticity of who's actually an Indian, first generation, second, third, this is where the problem arises. And if you look at the comparison with the Mexican diaspora in the United States, Mexico allows them to vote in the Mexican elections in Mexico. So again, I mean, there are different places, different countries that allow or don't allow, because the Mexican diaspora plays a very huge role in the economic development of that country. They want them to be politically active. India does not, because they are fearful. India is not Mexico. I mean, it's much larger. There are so many points of entry, and India faces more security threats than Mexico in a way. So we have, just looking at India again, it's a very complex process, and some concessions need to be made. For example, like you said, tourism. If you want to attract tourism, you can't have restrictions, but it's really about prioritization. Which one does the Indian government feels greater priority that they're working on? So I don't have much more insight into this.
So one question.
Final. Okay, go ahead.
Ma'am, you have said India didn't give dual citizenship. But the migrants, the people who are migrants from several, like when we talk about Tibetans who are migrants from 1960s, and they are coming from in different waves in India, due to whether we are looking at this issue in international relation, that we didn't give them citizenship of India, but what should be the take of India in the perspective of international relation? That one way we are creating an international relationship with Tibetan and other neighbor countries, and another way, and simultaneously we are allowing them to come in our country for both political, social and economic reasons. But another way we are just neglecting them to give citizenship of India. Then what should be the take of Indian government to allow them, or to?
I thought Tibetans are political refugees, is it? And
sir, actually, political refugees
are they given
are considered
citizenship?
political.
Are they given citizenship? Indian citizenship? I doubt.
Indian government.
No, that's a different thing. But political refugees under the Tibetan situation is a very complex
Sir, actually,
situation.
after 1990s, they are coming for their livelihood generation. They are coming for better income perspectives. They are coming for social reasons. They have networkings in India. They have family.
That's true, but overall, they will be classified as refugees, political refugees, and certain privileges are given to, under international convention to such kind of refugees, and probably, that is continuing. Given our relation with China also, there's some soft corners. So maybe,
Actually, there are also political asylum seekers, and it will take some time before they are. It's a different discussion about Tibetan. Her question was about Tibetan refugees and asylum seekers in India, and does the Indian government support their right for identity and return to their country? It's a completely different topic, though. But just to put a word on that, for the most part, it's part of a bigger, the game with China, as it's called. It's more of a stalemate scenario where. Probably India does not want to drastically change its policy towards China, where Tibet may not play such a big role. And I think that's out of my area of research and expertise.
Okay, friends, now we have a discussant, Mr. Jitendra Soni, who will be coming here and presenting his views after listening to these papers and